The current crisis in the Middle East has the potential to escalate into a situation which would trigger a global economic recession, the likes of which the world has never seen. Let's talk about it. Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So the current crisis in the Middle East has the potential to escalate into a global economic crisis of epic proportions. And we're but one incident away from this whole situation spiraling out of control. While there may at first appear to be little political incentive to enter into a direct engagement with Iran, the reality is, historically, that whenever the United States has been in a conflict with another country, the existing president has been re-elected for a second term. So the current president may still have some political incentive to go for broke if they see the next election being insurmountable. What would the outcome be of such an event? It's important to recognize that 20% of the world's oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Any conflict within the region would almost immediately shut down this passageway, stopping these flows of oil, and many an oil tanker will be sunk. In addition to this, the US has many military bases surrounding Iran, and numerous allies within the region, among the most prominent of those being Israel and Saudi Arabia. Many of these military outposts are in close proximity to Saudi Arabia, and most definitely will be targets in the instance of an Iranian counteroffensive. This may have the consequence of sucking Saudi Arabia into a direct engagement with Iran, something they've arguably been preparing for militarily for decades, as they are one of Iran's biggest rivals within the region. If Saudi Arabia were to enter into a conflict with Iran, this will put further stress on oil production within this region, as these two countries exchange blows, doing heavy damage to each other's infrastructure. It's likely that the prices of oil are going to skyrocket around the world as a result of this. If the price of oil goes up, it doesn't only mean the price of gas goes up. It means the price of everything is going to go up. Nearly every manufacturing and agricultural process is dependent upon oil. Can you imagine a world that is already stretched thin and enduring agricultural hardship as a result of wild weather extremes, now being forced to further ration fuel? This is going to amount to more austerity and more civil unrest as prices of food around the world skyrocket. And if there ever was a time for the next great pandemic to rear its ugly head, it would be in a period of time of crumbling infrastructure, a time when sanitation took the back seat to feeding armies. The Middle East would be a powder keg of activity, while the rest of the world was awaiting oil shipments. If countries around the world cannot import oil, that will put great stress on their own economies. Many countries are already in conflict over resources, water being one of them. If the price of oil rises, the price of water also rises, as water treatment facilities will rely on it in order to function. The next consequence of a conflict within this region would be a refugee crisis of epic proportions. The absence of an Iranian regime would create a major power vacuum within the region, and further destabilize it, promoting an exodus which would dwarf the Syrian refugee crisis. This will inevitably lead to an increase in the exportation of global terror. Iran is home to 80 million people, around 3 times the size of Iraq, and they are far more ideologically and politically unified, as opposed to Iraq, where there are numerous different factions vying for power. Iran has a culture whose historical roots run very deep, and thus many analysts predict that it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to break their resolve, as many attempts have been made to do so already, which have included failed clandestine operations to try to foment rebellion from within the country. In 2002, the United States invested $250 million into a war game simulation, which was meant to simulate what an invasion of Iran would look like. This was called the Millennium Challenge. The best case scenario that came out of this war game back in 2002, before Iran was more capable than it is now, was 20,000 lives lost on the US side. In fact, US military officials were so embarrassed at the outcome that they redid the war game exercise, and they had the Iranian side essentially throw the fight and let the Americans win. This caused one general to quit the exercise, saying that this is utterly pointless because this is not actually preparing us. This is not the purpose of a wargame exercise. Now, apparently there was a leak by the Pentagon which presented a military plan to the president's top national security aides that calls for up to 120,000 troops deploying to the Middle East, and a potential crippling cyber attack on Iran's infrastructure should Iran speed up its nuclear program. Although we are told that it's likely that any engagement with Iran will likely consist mostly of airstrikes and cyber offensives. At the time of this video's release, it's expected that Iran is going to cross the red line in terms of what's allowable under the existing agreement with regards to their nuclear material enrichment. If they do cross that line in the sand, which they're claiming they may do because the United States has withdrawn from the agreement and sanctions are now put on them, which gives them no incentive to abide by the agreement that they made. It's very likely then that we would see a significant provocative act within the Persian Gulf, which would essentially lead the United States and Iran into a conflict. The other elephants in the room here are China and India. Both of these countries are major importers of oil, and they both get significant amounts of oil from Iran. China is well aware that they cannot continue to rely on importing their oil from Russia, as Russia's oil's reserves are very limited. The short of it is, hundreds of millions of people within Asia are dependent on Iranian oil. And if Saudi Arabia becomes fully engaged in a conflict with Iran, billions, not millions of people around the world will be negatively impacted by oil shortages. Due to the involvement of these larger nuclear-armed countries, there is a possibility that this could escalate. The situation could definitely snowball into a major global conflict. We haven't even approached the issue of the massive loss of life which would ensue should these countries engage in conflict with one another. Even though it's expected that the United States' superior military will ultimately topple the Iranian regime, the subsequent drawn-out asymmetrical combat which would ensue would put major economic stress on the United States as they enter what many have projected to be an unwinnable quagmire situation that would dwarf that of the Iraqi conflict. It should also be noted that the significance of sanctions on any country should not be underestimated. A sanction is essentially a form of attrition, where you are essentially punishing a country's civilian population by limiting their access to vital resources and essentially starving them out, or just applying pressure as it's euphemistically termed. I read an article recently that suggested that the United States had been planning a cyber attack weeks prior to the recent incidents in the Persian Gulf. If this actually is the case, some might speculate that the United States is trying to goad Iran into a conflict within this region. If there ever was a time to stock up on preps, I think that time is now, because this could lead to an economic crisis of historic proportions if the worst case scenario were to play out. There are numerous factors to this complex situation that I cannot even begin to address within this video. But there are countless videos here on YouTube of knowledgeable analysts who can hopefully shed some light on the situation for you, and I would encourage you to go and do your own research. I suggest you utilize this platform to get as much information as you possibly can. Do you think we are on the brink of chaos in the Middle East? How do you think it's going to play out? Please let me know in the comment section below. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and don't forget, enjoy the moments that you have with your family, because that's what matters most. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out. The best way to support this YouTube channel is to support yourself by gearing up through CanadianPreparedness.com or BugoutRoll.ca. Premium quality gear at the best possible price using the incredibly secure and easy to use Shopify platform. We offer free shipping to the United States for orders over $200 USD and free shipping to Canada over $75. So support the channel by supporting yourself.